Welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. I'm not sure if you've been paying attention, but I'm here to break it to you. There is an election happening here in Canada. So today we are going to take a deep dive and we are going to look at the three major parties' platforms, specifically when it comes to housing. So here to break it down, we have Kori, Marin, my partner in crime, co-founder of Fox Marin. I am Ralph Fox, the co-founder and broker of record of Fox Marin, and we are here to look at the number one, or at least one of the top three important topics of this upcoming election, that being housing and housing affordability. And we're here to take a look at what all three parties are promising to do about the affordability crisis that we're here having basically right across Canada. Kori, so great to have you joining us on this wonderful topic today.
Well, thank you for having me. This seems like this will be the last day of spring as we head into an ice storm this weekend. So we're going to celebrate the sunny skies today while we have them. And I'm looking forward to discussing this with you. A couple things here for our audience. We are going to do our best to be very bipartisan and just present the facts today, and then some of our opinions about some of these policies as well from an anecdotal perspective. I would also like to add, in preparation for this podcast, I actually really thought that all I would have to do is go to each party's website and then click a button that says housing policy, and then be able to see a drop-down menu with all of the parties' positions on housing and affordability and homelessness and some of the topics we're going to cover today. And that does not exist. So the research for this actually took a lot of time, which I found to be just interesting within itself. So we are trying to present this in a factual basis. I did really cross-reference as much as I could between what the parties have been saying, what their websites are saying, what they've said in their press releases and their press conferences. And of course, as the audience, as you're listening to this today, if there's anything you'd like to add or correct or suggest as a source for our audience to get really familiar with these party platforms, we really welcome and invite you to do so. Of course, we expect over the next month or so, these parties to release more information about this topic. And Ralph mentioned this is a very, very, very hot topic for these parties. I expect this to come up in the debate, the French and English debates on the 16th and 17th. So keep your eyes peeled for more policy initiatives coming from the party leaders. But this is sort of where I feel things stand today. Now, we also have to remember that the Liberal Party has been leading the country for the last 9 years. So they do have some policies that they've put into play over the last year, which we're going to focus on, which ones are actually enacted, which ones are still tabled, and which ones have been cut from the table, such as the capital gains tax as an example. So it's a little touch and go with some of these things as things continue to evolve as we approach April 28th, which is the election date. Of course, we encourage everyone who's watching to get out and vote. This is a really important election. It's very meaningful. Your ballot does mean something. So I hope everyone does encourage their friends and family and everyone to get out there and vote as well. So with that being said, I thought, Ralph, it would be really helpful for our audience that we set the stage as to sort of where things stand with housing affordability, just as a starting piece, just so that people can wrap their heads around this. We all know that housing is ridiculously expensive. So we're completely acknowledging that. It's off the charts for most people when it comes to big city urban centers like Toronto and Vancouver. So we're not suggesting by any means that pricing is affordable. So I just want to get that out of the way. And then just talk about some key indicators to set the stage, and then we'll jump into the Conservative, Liberal, and NDP party initiatives. Sound like a plan?
Yeah, let's dig into it.
Okay. Awesome.
Take it away, Kor.
Okay, awesome. Well, this first chart here is the national average home price in Canada since 2014. So what I was trying to do was find graphs just to show what things look like over the last decade. We're not going to really dive into the data here. I just want to present something visually to our audience here. You all know that prices have risen over the last decade. In fact, they've doubled and tripled in some areas. This particular chart comes from the Canadian Real Estate Association. And all you have to do is take a quick glance at this to know that home prices are through the roof. And to see that escalation in price in such a short period of time makes housing unreachable for most young people. Ralph, do you want to add anything about this chart?
Nope.
And then again, I also wanted to show rents over the last 10 years. I mean, look at that chart right there. I mean, that's all you have to look at. Again, this is across Canada. If you live in a major urban center, the rents are double this at least, if not triple. And this, again, this chart for rents comes from CREA, which is the Canadian Real Estate Association as well. And now this chart here, this is sourced from Statistics Canada. And this is showing since 2012, the after-tax income for households, the median market income from household, and then how much support families are receiving from government. So that red line shows you, of course, as you look along the bottom there, you can see that there was more government subsidies over COVID, which makes sense. But if you look at the median after-tax income and the median market income, you can see since 2012 that there's been very little bump in income over the last decade, acknowledging this chart only goes to 2022. All you have to think about, housing prices through the roof, rental prices through the roof. Look at incomes, and there's been this incremental change. This has been sourced through Stats Canada. A very difficult chart to find. So if you want to link up anything awesome about the average income per family household across the national average down below, be happy to see that too.
I think it's an unbelievable juxtaposition between the rise in rents and the rise in the average Canadian home price. And we're not even talking about Toronto, which is really where we focus on. We're just talking about Canada and the juxtaposition of income. It's quite disparaging when you see this. And you just look at these three charts, and it's self-explanatory as to why we have this housing crisis. And I think one of the unfortunate things about the the election here in Canada in terms of its timing is what should have been and what formerly was the number one topic, which was housing affordability, has now been pushed down to a distant second with the threat of US tariffs and Donald Trump and everything else that surrounds the threat of the U.S. Taunting Canada to become a 51st state.
Which will never happen.
That really has now superseded everything. And I think it's unfortunate because this topic really should be front and center, and it's now been pushed down, unfortunately. And really, I mean, if you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s and you own a house that you paid $5,000 for or $10,000 for, no wonder why, you have a certain viewpoint as to where you want to see the direction of the country going in the future. Whereas if you're young and you're trying to figure out, what your future is going to look like, and you look at these affordability measures, it's quite depressing. And, I'd really love to just see more from all three parties. And it should be something that's front and center, not buried deep down and finding in bits and pieces as to what they're putting out there in terms of what their intentions are to turn this around, because it really isn't a pretty picture.
I totally agree. I really wish it was more up front and center, and we could just take the focus off the US Donald Trump story and put it back on Canadian issues. And I agree, if housing affordability is really big, immigration is a massive one for people as well. And I think crime and safety is another one. And I'd love to really hear all three party leaders really talking about that in depth. So hopefully at the debate, we can really, really spend some time here. And I think that Canadians deserve to understand these platforms. These are really the last two charts that I want to go over before we dive into party policy. So this is from RBC Economics, and this is the share of income per household that you would need to cover ownership costs. So as Canada as a whole, this is from Q3 2024, so the data is very new. 58.4% of your total family income goes towards ownership costs. That's insane. That's the average. Vancouver, it's 96.7%. How's that even possible? Vancouver's prices we think Toronto's bad. Vancouver is another level. It's just out of control. Calgary is at 42.2%. Edmonton at 33.6%, which feels a little bit more palatable. Toronto, we know, is very expensive at 75%, Ottawa at 47%, and Montreal at 49%. So I think this is also helpful when people are like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to buy a house. I did everything right. I finished high school. I got good marks. I did my undergrad. I did my master's degree. Now I'm working. I make a decent salary for, my age and education. And like you're barely scraping by. You're paying your rent. You're paying astronomical amount just to eat healthy-ish food. You might party once a week at that if you're lucky. And then you're like, how am I supposed to save for a down payment and buy one of these properties at these prices? It makes sense that young people are super, super frustrated. And I think if I was in that position, I would be very deterred. And in addition to that, I would just like to remind people out there, especially young listeners, that most of our clients that are on the younger side, if they are acquiring properties in Toronto, they are for sure doing it with the help of a family member. So I don't want you to feel like unsuccessful or you're not doing something right, or you're like, I feel like a loser because I can't do this. Most of the people that are on the younger side, I would say 35 and under, or even 40 and under, are buying their first or second property with the help of their parents that have tons of equity in their homes. So just wanted to put that out there too.
When you look at this, it's like, I think the things you have done wrong is you weren't born 25 years ago, or you weren't born to a family that was upper middle class or upper class, because otherwise it's quite punitive when you look at this to figure out, how do I actually own a property in a large city in Canada? Now, one of the things to temper this information is there's a statistic where I think it's something like 38% of all homes in Canada are owned mortgage free. So we're taking that cohort out of the mix and we're looking at it from the perspective more so of somebody just trying to buy today based on today's prices and today's carrying costs and all the inflation we've seen in all the related costs, with carbon taxes and everything else that goes along with that, which we won't get into too much today. But it is very disheartening to see this. And again, it just solidifies that, we are in a real housing crisis here. And the other thing that's interesting, not just talking about the difficulty in finding the platforms for all three parties, but it was a real challenge to put together these graphs and find what the median average income was, and to find, the housing affordability measures. You would think that this would be very easily found and everywhere. Not to sound conspiratorial in any way, but this information is hard to find. Like, it almost feels like it's been a little bit buried. Not saying that it has been, but knowing that this is such a problem, and being able to feel it and see it every day when you just talk to people, especially younger people, to then look for the data to support it and to understand what's going on, it is not readily found. So it is really interesting going through the process of putting this together. And thank you, Kori, because I know you spent quite a lot of time on getting this data and graphs and information. It's interesting that you really have to dig deep to find it.
Yeah, it really is. And I would like just to make a shout out to RBC. Not that do I bank with them? We bank with everybody, but I do find that they have some really fantastic housing reports. And so if you are somebody who likes to read data and look at reporting, I would say from the 5 big banks, they have the strongest reporting that is most accessible on their website and easily ingested and easy to understand. So shout out to them for that, because they were very helpful in this preparation. One last chart to go. Oh, sorry,
And
Ralph.
one more shout out to RBC. They've been the best bank at projecting where they think interest rates are going over the last couple of years. We've seen everybody get it wrong, but RBC has been pretty good consistently with their projections as well as their data. So shout out to RBC.
I love it. I didn't know we were going to be doing an RBC sponsored podcast today, but it looks like we gave them a plug. And this is just one last chart I want to go over before we take our deeper dive. Again, this was sourced from various sources on I believe it was the RBC website, but this combines Stats Canada and the Bank of Canada as well. And this is ownership costs as a percentage of household income in Canada as a composite of all of the housing categories. And again, I just wanted to give you the visual that home ownership has become more and more and more out of reach. You can see that line from about 1999, 2000, and how it's been incrementally going up. Now, at the end of this chart, you see it become a dotted line. That is the forecast, in that housing affordability is forecasted to become a little bit more palatable as we move into 2025 and 2026. That is to be seen. And I also thought, and as for the former chart as well, you can see in the late 80s and early 90s when interest rates were through the roof, you can see that we had this blip as well in this particular chart where affordability was hovering closer to 55, 56%. So that gives you a little bit of hope. Now, different circumstances. Right now, we're really dealing with a supply issue, a population and immigration issue here, and then cost to build is a big problem. In the 90s, it was very much interest rate related, but you can see, and it kind of does give you a little bit of hope, that oftentimes things are a pendulum and you'll see things go up and down. So, and you see that blip again a little bit just before, I guess, around the subprime crisis in 2008 as well, which is just interesting to see the ebb and flow of the chart. So hopefully this gives you a bit of hope. You're like, people in the 90s seem to have gone through that, so maybe I might have a chance too. Anything you want to add to this, Ralph, before we jump in?
Yeah, I think what will be interesting is to see how tariffs and this US situation plays out, because we could see rates coming down quite quickly. We had auto tariffs at 25% just announced. That's going to pay a heavy price on some of the outer regions in Ontario, meaning outside of Toronto, places like Windsor. And we also might see the money printer starting to rev up. And depending upon who forms the next government, we could see immigration starting to ramp up right again as well. So there is a potential to see prices start to move upwards if all of this starts to happen, which it may. And it's just so difficult to predict. And I think if RBC was looking at this chart today, they may have different forecasts in terms of affordability and prices going forward. Things really, really are evolving. And as we get into the platforms, and you touched upon this earlier, Kori, as we get into the platforms for all three parties, it could look very different in 2 weeks from now or even tomorrow. But this is a really good high level of where we are at today based on what we are able to dig up. And I'm really excited taking a look at it.
Amazing. Okay, well, let's do that. So first, we're going to go through the Conservative Party, which is led by Pierre Poilievre. And then just to make this easy for you, I put the logo on every slide and then the party's color. So as we're going through the podcast, you can be able to reference that so that it kind of resonates with that visual as well. So you have to remember that a lot of the Conservative Party's positions are proposed right now because they're obviously not running the country. So Pierre's position here is that housing costs in Canada have doubled over the past decade, as we've just indicated in the former charts, making it nearly impossible for many to buy a home. Poilievre says this is the first time young Canadians feel home ownership is out of reach, which is actually really sad. It actually makes me feel really sad because it's such an amazing goal to have. His party's 2025 platform aims to dramatically increase housing supply, lower costs, and restore what he calls the dream of home ownership. He also wants to axe the GST on new homes. So I just want to be like, I underline that here. So new construction, newly built homes priced under $1.3 million. So it's something else I want you to remember. This measure aims to reduce the purchase prices and incentivize builders to increase the housing supply by approximately 36,000 homes annually, and save buyers up to $65,000. So additionally, the party intends to work with provincial governments to remove their own sales taxes on new homes to further reduce the cost for home buyers.
That a new Conservative government will put Canada first by taking GST, the federal sales tax, off of all homes under $1.3 million. We will axe the tax so that every Canadian can buy a new home tax-free. That will spark 360,000 extra homes every single year, boost our GDP by $2.5 billion, create tens of thousands of jobs for our builders right behind me, and also for our forestry workers who will get back out into our forests, harvesting our wonderful lumbers, turning towering timbers into 2x4s that will uphold these wonderful homes. We'll build Canadian homes with Canadian lumber, Canadian trades workers doing the job. This will mean a savings of up to $65,000 on a new home, or $3,000 less in annualized mortgage payments. Real savings for Canadians will be also compounded as we incentivize municipalities to free up land, speed up permits, and cut development charges to build 15% more per year. We will sell off 15% of federal buildings and land to build homes. We will reject the Liberal Century initiative that would increase our population to 100 million. And instead, we will cap immigration so that population growth never exceeds the growth in the housing stock.
Oh, I think it's great. It originally was 1 million. So by Toronto standards, that really doesn't get you a whole heck of a lot. To see that move up to 1.3, I think is going to move the needle a little bit more than that $1 million mark. And to allow it for all buyers, not just first-time buyers, which we'll get into when we talk about the Liberal platform, I think that's also helpful. Is it going to solve everything? Absolutely not. But I think it's just one more step in addressing all of the taxes that are involved with purchasing a property. Like when you're looking at new homes, and we've talked about this on past discussions on this channel, but 30% of new construction is taxes. So if you were to buy $1 million condo, $300,000 in various levels of municipal, provincial, and federal taxes will make up that $1 million, which is excessive comparative to places like, I don't know, in New Jersey, it's something like 7%. So starting to talk about these costs and reducing these costs is a really great conversation to have. And I look forward to this continuing because I think there's more that can be done.
And I'd also just want to make this clear that this is new homes, like new construction. So if you wanted to buy residential resale and you wanted to buy a Victorian house in Trinity Bellwoods that was built in 1890 and have tons of character that is somehow under 1.3 million, which would never exist in Toronto, this would not apply. So I think this is going to be more effective for condos in Toronto, new construction, and you're going to see this really hit in terms of the GTA with the 905 area and suburban new homes, like in your Whitby, your Pickerings, your Orangevilles, and I'm trying to do a West End area. It's a West End community, Oakville. That's as far as I could get.
Good job.
All right. Another piece of the Conservative platform is building homes, not bureaucracy. They aim to address housing affordability by incentivizing major cities to increase completions by at least 15% annually. We are dealing with a massive supply problem here in Canada. Not necessarily trying to curb demand, we need to increase supply. So cities that meet or exceed this target could receive bonus federal funding, while those that fail to achieve the goal would face reductions in infrastructure funding proportional to their shortfall. Any thoughts, Ralph?
Always. I think it's really important when we're talking about supply, because you're already talking about supply, and I could just see everybody seething. There's 7 months of inventory of condos, and we're up to 7,000 on the market.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to remind the viewers that is today, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but the fact that new construction sales have basically been anemic over the last 2 to 3 years is ensuring that from 2028 and beyond, we're talking less than 3,000 deliveries for the GTA, which is a population of 7 million. And that could go down to zero, and it will take years and years and years and years and years and years to rebound. And so I think having as much as we can to encourage new supply to happen by bringing down costs and by incentivizing municipalities to encourage building is a really, really good thing, because once resale rebounds, which is going to be the first needle to move, that then will start to reignite pre-construction, which is primarily driven by investors. And investors can be a bit of a dirty word, but we need their capital in order to get properties built. Any home, any condo, any low-rise, it was originally built by an investor, or there was investors involved in getting it built, even if you were an end user. So we have to encourage investments, and we have to incentivize all levels of government to increase supply, because in a couple of years, not necessarily today when it comes to high-rise, certainly low-rise is a different story, But we're gonna have a real problem in a few years, and it's really important to be thinking ahead because it's going to be a challenge to affordability and housing prices in a couple of years, and it'll go by just like that.
The next piece here is tie transit funds to density. So, a policy that ties federal transit funding to housing density near transit stations, specifically cities that do not permit sufficient high density housing within 800 meters of transit stations would have their federal transit funding withheld. This approach aligns with the party's broader strategy to increase housing supply and then encourage urban densification around transit hubs. And I mean, Toronto, transit, brutal. We just need so much more infrastructure to speak to this very type of funding. I don't know if it will ever get fixed here, but in terms of future planning for other areas that are expanding and other communities that are expanding because they're a little bit more affordable, I really think this is an important initiative.
Agreed.
NIMBY penalties.
What's a NIMBY, Kori?
A NIMBY penalty is a federal platform.
No, what is a NIMBY?
Oh, I don't know. What does a NIMBY mean?
It stands for not in my backyard.
Oh,
and so
I didn't know that.
It's advocates who lives in a neighborhood where they have these beautiful homes that they've owned and they don't want any density coming into their neighborhoods.
Not in my backyard.
Of course. And then you have a lot of politicians supporting their constituents who tend to be the most vocal to try and prohibit or stop density or building happening in certain neighborhoods.
So this is meant to incentivize faster zoning and permitting by penalizing municipalities that fail to meet housing targets. Because we know, I mean, we can only really speak to Toronto here, but zoning and permitting is like one giant pain in the butt, bottleneck torture for everybody at all levels of whatever they're trying to do. So that would be incredible. And then additionally, empowering Canadians to file complaints to trigger federal reviews or municipal actions when their new housing construction is limited or it's postponed or it's slow. So you'll have the opportunity to make a federal complaint and have your voice heard. Ralph, anything there?
Nope.
We've heard about this a lot from all platforms over the years, unlocking federal land. Within 18 months of taking office, the Conservatives pledged to list 15% of federal buildings and all suitable surplus land for housing development. We'll see. This initiative aims to increase housing supply. So I'm very curious to see if this actually comes to fruition, if it's platformed, if it goes through. Who knows? We've heard about this for years and years. I'm not sure it'll ever happen. What do you think, Ralph?
Well, I do know that the federal government does own a lot of land and a lot of buildings. And what is the most efficient use of those properties in a residential crisis? I think that there should definitely be an audit, and I think that there should definitely be an undertaking and a commitment so that we efficiently utilize all of our resources, given the fact that we have this real housing affordability issue.
I always think it's interesting and not quite tied to this, but we walk by through U of T all the time, and like they have like crazy land in Toronto, like primo.
Oh, yeah, the
biggest. It's gorgeous, primo areas.
Though. Oh my God. Gorgeous. Some of the buildings and landscape, it's just beautiful.
But I'm always laughing because they get their projects completed so quickly. Like they're like, we need to build a new student residence on this corner. And then they just execute and get that thing done so fast. Like we live very close to the Mirvish buildings at Bathurst and Bloor, which is just turned into like a desolate construction zone that's been trying to be completed for, I don't know what year we're on right now, right? Year 6?
I think it's longer. I think we're getting close to a decade.
Oh, it's just torture.
We're getting close to it.
Nothing's happening there. There's a whole other story about that. We're not going to get into that right now, but I'm always like, U of T has all this beautiful land and they construct things so quickly. I'm just like, how come the rest of us can't seem to get our act together?
Well, they also have like an endowment of
I know.
Billions.
I know. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Moving on. Renters and affordable rentals. GST relief for affordable rentals. Remove the GST on new rental housing projects that offer below market rents. This initiative aims to incentivize the construction of affordable rental units directly targeting housing affordability across the nation for Canadians and collaborate with provinces to lower other development fees and taxes in relation to rental construction costs. So that covers that. Cutting red tape and bureaucracy. Yes, across the board. Well, Pierre did introduce in his team in Parliament, it's called Bill C-356, but it was defeated in May of 2024. So I'm just trying to highlight some of the things that have happened in this category over the last 12 months. The Conservative Party proposed Building Homes, Not Bureaucracy Act includes provisions to reform the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which is also known as CMHC, which is always such a tongue tie to say the acronym. Specifically, the act aims to eliminate CMHC executive bonuses unless housing targets are met, to reduce executive compensation if applications for funding for new housing constructions are not processed within 60 days. This initiative was designed to expedite federal housing approvals. Unfortunately, this was defeated in Parliament. And I was laughing as I was doing the research for this. And I was like on the government website looking up the bill. And then I was like, how did they get here? Like I would just, kept digging and digging. And I was looking at the notes from the meetings and like who was involved in pitching this. And I was looking at all their bio pictures. Anyways, I do like the idea just across the board, no matter if it has to do with housing, if it has to do with immigration, if it has to do with any of the big categories. We've got to reduce regulation and a lot of this bloat we have in our government.
Part that I like where it talks about CMHC bonuses, CMHC executives not getting bonuses unless housing targets are met, and to reduce executive compensation if applications for funding for new construction are not processed with an average of 60 days. This initiative was designed to expedite federal housing approvals and this is the part that's the most important, hold officials accountable for performance. That is the number one thing, regardless of who goes into power, is that there is accountability for performance, because right now there just hasn't been any accountability for outcomes. $40 billion debt. Now it's $60 billion. Sorry, we missed.
Oopsies.
Oops. Yeah. It's unbelievable. So that is one thing that I would just love to see more of across the board, not just for housing, because I think we're paying into the system so much. It's not a lot to ask.
Yeah, I really like the idea of that and transparency across the board with that as well. And the public deserves to know what's happening to all of our tax dollars, like oodles of it. We pay so much here. So much. So it'll be interesting to see how our government responds to that in relation to how the US has been dealing with this. I'm not suggesting that we do that or anything before anyone freaks out. I just think that the transparency there has been very interesting. And then the last category for the Conservatives, homelessness and housing security. Okay, like it's evident that this is a problem. You just have to turn on any mainstream news media outlet and or independent media outlet to see, or just walk the streets of any major city to see how much this has really affected everyone at every level, regardless of the community that you live in. It's just huge. So the Conservative Party wants to focus on the root cause of homelessness, which has a lot to do, not only to do, but has a lot to do with housing affordability. And instead of introducing a standalone homelessness program, they want to emphasize increasing housing supply and reducing costs. Poilievre has highlighted the severity of the housing crisis, and he's talking about at least in Toronto alone, that we have over 1,400, in Ontario, alone, over 1,400 homeless encampments. And I mean, we drive by them all the time. I mean, Ralph and I drive through this city with clients and see listings all the time, and we drive by these tent communities, and it's just awful to see for everybody, including the people who are living there. It's just awful. Poilievre outlines his approach, which also includes building more homes, banning hard drugs, defunding drug sites, and treating addiction to bring family members back to their houses, which has a lot to do with this. This goes around and around in a big cycle. And then, of course, this approach aligns with the party's broader build homes, not bureaucracy approach. So if anyone wants to add any more clarity about any of these topics with the Conservative Party, please
we welcome.
Yeah, we totally do. I feel like this is a good sort of general perspective of how they want to approach this. Then we'll look at the Liberal Party, what they have done and what they have sort of projected for the future as well next. Anything else you want to add, Conservative side, Ralph, before we move on?
Nope.
Awesome. the Liberal Party. So they have just proposed, and this is interesting because we'll can be able to compare apples to apples. On March 20th of this year, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that the Liberal government will eliminate the 5% GST for first-time homebuyers purchasing newly built homes priced at under $1 million. And this measure is supposed to save buyers up to $50,000 and encourage the construction of new homes. So he's basically competing directly with the conservative position here. His is capped at $1 million. The Conservatives are capped at $1.3 million. The Liberal Party is focused on first-time homebuyers. The Conservative Party is focused on all buyers. So there's two major differences between these policy initiatives.
How can we help Canadians, particularly younger Canadians, buy their first homes right now? So what I'm announcing today is that my new government will eliminate the GST for first-time homebuyers on all new and substantially renovated homes under $1 million. Now, this is a big deal because first-time homebuyers are the major purchasers of new and substantially renovated homes. This can provide up to $50,000 in savings for families entering the housing market.
In effect, the federal government, and we've talked about this on former podcasts as well, has raised the Homebuyer Plan Initiative withdrawal limit from $35,000 to $60,000, effective for withdrawals made after April 16th, 2024, to help buyers be able to pull money out to buy a home or put money towards their down payment. And as of December 15th, 2024, the maximum purchase price for uninsured mortgages was increased from $1 million to $1.5 million to better reflect current housing market conditions. But what is this actually doing, Ralph?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it is true when it says to reflect current market conditions, in that $1 million really doesn't get you much in Toronto, especially if you're looking for something other than a condo. So I think that is a fair statement. Where we run into problems is that it really is a demand side stimulant. And it has accelerated demand for first-time buyers who are pretty strapped in that 1 to 1.2, 1.3 price range. And we've seen a real uptick and run up in low-rise homes, which are very scarce already to begin with in downtown Toronto. And yes, your costs go up a lot when you're talking about an uninsured mortgage, especially over $1 million. The other thing is that it extended the amortization as well to 30, from 25 years to 30 years. And so really what that has done is just brought in more demand, which has brought up prices and activity in that price range. And we are seeing a lot of activity. Bully offers are back, and certainly we're seeing offer dates with multiple offers on properties in that price point. So maybe a slight surge of assistance with affordability, but at the end of the day, it's helped to drive up activity and prices in that niche market. And you just have to think, like, they're not building any more houses in that price range in central or downtown Toronto. And so if you add 50 or 100 more buyers to the mix, you know, when you're only selling, I don't know, how many would sell in that price range? Like a couple hundred a month?
Oh, if that.
Right? Yeah. So it's really, really, really interesting. And when I say that, I mean central and downtown Toronto. It didn't help do what they were saying it was going to do when Freeland was talking about how it's going to help stimulate supply. All it's really done is just stimulate demand. So we'll see how it plays out. It's definitely helpful for families or couples or individuals who have very, very strong income but no savings. And that's where the most benefit is. But to the average Canadian, I really don't think it helps too much.
Yeah, I think it's really increased competition. And when you increase competition, you increase prices. So it might have its reverse effect. So we'll keep paying attention to this and see if it's discussed in any more of what the parties are releasing in terms of their platforms and the discussions they're having with the press. The Housing Accelerator Fund. So the HAF was launched in March of 2023. So we're going back in time a little bit under the Liberal banner. as a $4 billion initiative aimed at incentivizing municipalities to implement zoning reforms and expedite housing approvals. In the 2024 budget, the government allocated an additional $400 million to the HAF fund, bringing its total funding to $4.4 billion. This fund is designed to fast track the construction of at least 100,000 homes over the next 3 years and more than 750 homes across Canada over the next decade. So what's interesting about this is I was like, well, how many completions have taken place? That's what I really wanted to understand. If the idea is that we're going to build 100,000 new homes over the next 3 years, where are we at? And again, viewers, if you have this information or can link it up for me, that would be super helpful. But like I used every tool in the toolkit to try to figure out an answer to this. And the only fact I could confirm is that in year 1 of implementation of this particular Housing Accelerator Fund, the City of Toronto has only achieved 37.5% of this target. Like not even close. We're not even at 50%. And so we are far behind from my understanding anyways, and I'm super open to being corrected here, super behind this particular initiative. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay, new in 2024. So these are some of the programs the Liberals have introduced that have actually passed. I just want to be very clear about that. So Canada Build program was announced by the federal government in April 2024 as a collaborative initiative with provincial and territorial governments to accelerate the construction of new rental housing across Canada. Public lands for homes, that was introduced in the budget in 2024 as part of the federal government strategy to address housing affordability by using these underused public lands, as we discussed with the Conservative platform, for residential redevelopment. And then the housing design catalog, which I actually took a look at, was initially planned for 2024. I believe it just came out maybe about 3 weeks ago. This was developed and released by the federal government, and this was to create kind of like easy to build, user-friendly plans, design plans, 50 design plans to help accelerate the construction process for row houses, fourplexes, sixplexes, and accelerated dwelling units like a laneway house, for example. And so basically it's a catalog that is a plug and play for builders so that they can just get the work done faster. And I looked at the designs and they would work in certain communities. They're like a little bit more Scandian style than we're used to seeing in, let's say, for example, downtown Toronto. The one pushback that I did see, because I was looking at a lot of the comments about it, because I was watching a YouTube video about it, of course, because that's where you get all of our information now, the second largest search engine being YouTube. And I saw a lot of comments about the fact that most builders have these plug and play catalogs to begin with. So if you are like an Aspen Ridge, for example, you already have your catalog of houses that you can whip up pretty quickly, as long as you're not like stuck in the hell of bureaucracy, for example. And I know, we have a place up north and it's pretty close to a community called Shelburne, which is like an up and coming suburban area. And once they get the go button on these suburban communities, I mean, those houses went up in, I feel like it was just like 8 months. They were like done. Yeah. So I'm not sure how much this will actually help anything. I mean, it's an initiative and it's creative, which I can always respect. And if you want to take a look at those design plans, I'm happy to link up the video in the show notes below if that's a good resource for you to take a peek at. The Home Builders Bill of Rights. So as of March 2025, the Home Buyers Bill of Rights remains still in the developmental stage. So I want you to remember that. And this initiative had a lot to do with trying to like curb demand and like regulate the system. And we all know that the real estate system here can be a little bit hysterical at times, especially when we're in more of a high velocity competitive marketplace. This idea was to ban the blind bidding concept, or the sort of like blind auction concept that we use a lot here in Toronto, that's for sure, and we still do, establishing the legal right to have every buyer to have a home inspection, ensuring total transparency of the history of the recent house sale, prices on title searches, which I feel has become more and more transparent over the years. And most of our clients can see the history of the home on an app like House Sigma, for example. and requiring real estate agents just disclose if they are involved in both sides of the negotiation, which I know here in Ontario at least is a requirement, and all buyers need to sign off on that. So I'm not sure if there's any provinces where that's not required. So I'm not sure if that will have any effect, but it's certainly something that is disclosed here in Ontario.
What's interesting from a real estate perspective, in other places where they don't have blind bidding, like Australia, I believe in the UK, it hasn't really affected affordability. And there was a change here in Ontario where you can have open bidding, but the problem is that there are conditions going in with offers now where agents are saying, well, if you convey the contents of my offer will become null and void. It's a tricky situation. I don't think this will have much of an impact given how much has already been done on this side of things. Again, it's really going to come down to supply and what government or party can help drive supply more.
Yeah, 100%. Quickly, the Canadian Renters' Bill of Rights. So as of March 2024, the Liberal government announced a Canadian Renters' Bill of Rights as part of their federal platform. As of March 2025, this is still in the developmental stage. This has to do with the national standard of leases, pricing, transparency in terms of rents, and protection from rent evictions. Ralph, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, like it's again like something that governments have been talking about for a long time. It is important for everybody to have rights, not just renters, but landlords as well. So I think a lot of this has come and passed. I don't know how much it's changed affordability, and I don't really expect it to. So, it's good to see the government taking steps to address renters' rights. But when all of this came down the pipe in 2024, at the end of the day, provinces have the largest domain over housing. And there are pretty strong laws in place already to protect tenants. So I think this was just more of a much to do about nothing sort of thing where it's like, well, we're trying. But really, especially in Ontario and the landlord tribunal, there's just so much already there affecting the whole industry that I don't think it really had much of an effect at all. It was pretty much a nothing burger.
Nothing burger. I love that expression.
I like that word too. Yeah.
I have added a couple points here that you can read on the screen, but just for the sake of time, I just want to speak to one point on here that actually has been enacted in the 2024 budget, which is that the short-term rental enforcement fund. So there's $50 million allocated to help cities crack down on illegal Airbnb-style units. And so I think this has also affected, well, I know it has affected the investor pool. A lot of people had their condos or their smaller type row houses, low rise, being rented out on a short-term basis. And there's been a very quick change in terms of where you're permitted to do that and how you're taxed and what you can and cannot do and which buildings allow for that. And I think it's good in a lot of regards to protect the integrity of a building. So, for example, if condo buildings were permitting this, particularly in downtown areas where it's easy to have more transient in and out short-term renters, what was happening was a lot of these buildings were becoming like kind of hostile in style. And so even if I was showing units, for example, and sitting in the lobby waiting for the client, you would almost see a roll in and out of guests that were staying at Airbnbs with their backpacks on as if they were checking into a hostel on their European vacation in 1995. And that really just drags down, and that's not to say that's a good or bad thing. It just drags down like the vibe and the integrity of the building if you're seeing people come and go like that. In addition, there's lack of pride of ownership. And then it's also not good for safety as well. So we've seen a lot of buildings, Airbnb and short-term rental.
100%. This is one I can 100% get behind. I think it's really been detrimental to condos, to other owners in the buildings, to valuations, to pride of ownership, to wanting to actually own real estate in Toronto. I think it's really, really positive, and I 100% support it. And I think, if you have a beautiful house, I've had instances, family members as well as clients, where they own a beautiful house in a neighborhood and there's a ghost hotel right beside them with people partying. and there's just nothing that could have been done up until a certain point in time. And so to see this crackdown, it actually warms the cockles of my heart. And part of the problem is it also helped drive valuations of properties up, because people could try to justify the higher income to pay more for properties. And I just don't think in residential areas or in condo buildings, people should be running independent party hotels. So I really, really welcome this, actually. And I think this is a great initiative.
Well, it's already been enacted.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay. Thank you.
The last thing on the Liberal side, affordable housing and homelessness, just to be clear as well, these were all enacted in the 2024 budget. So affordable housing fund top-up, $1 billion added to build deeply affordable and supportive units. Rapid housing stream permanently add to fund fast build for at-risk groups. Reaching home strategy, so $1.3 billion for local homelessness prevention and shelters, which is a little bit different in terms of the conservative strategy around homelessness. The support of encampments of $250 million for transitional housing and encampment response. It's a lot. It's unfortunate that we even have to put that much money towards that. And hopefully we can find a resolve on this issue, whatever party ends up winning the election. And support for refugee and asylum housing, $1.1 billion for municipal shelter pressures. So also interesting to see where funds are allocated in this category too.
Awesome.
All right.
So that's the Liberal Party. Anything you want to say with a wrap up here? Maybe the differences between the two or similarities?
I think we'll do that at the end. Let's do NDP because it's pretty short. NDP, they've obviously been like really suffering. I don't really feel like they're on the bill this year, but I think that we should touch on it briefly. Okay. And then let's talk about a few bigger picture items and we'll conclude. So the NDP, they are really emphasizing the use of public lands to increase affordable housing. So unlocking public land, NDP plans to allocate 100% of suitable federal-owned land for the construction of over 100,000 rent-controlled homes by 2035. So that's interesting. Singh highlights the urgency of this initiative, stating that Canada requires 6 million new homes and underscoring the party's dedication to ensuring these homes are affordable and accessible.
When I talk to people, everywhere I go, they say, I can't find a place that's affordable. I can't find a place that I can afford to rent. I simply cannot find anything. And for those people, I want to let you know that I hear you. It's frustrating. I can see why you're so angry because there's nothing there that's affordable.
Singh really criticizes previous Liberal and Conservative governments for their slow progress. I mean, it has been freaking slow. Noting that only 85 homes per year have been built on public land over the last 30 years, which is interesting, and emphasizes working and middle-class families are being priced out of the market. We know that. And big corporations are buying up homes, offices, and lands at reduced prices. What do you think about the big corporations coming in and buying up stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a problem. It's a massive problem in the US where, you have BlackRock just buying up houses. Imagine in a bidding war competing against BlackRock for a house.
Yeah.
I do think that is a concern, and it was a growing trend that we were seeing maybe a couple of years ago, not as much recently, but I do think that is something that should be watched and controlled and curtailed. If they want to build new homes and add value, no problem. But if they want to buy existing, I have a real big issue with that. And the other thing I have an issue with this platform is 100,000 rent-controlled homes built and owned by the government. I don't know if you've seen any of the city-controlled properties.
Terrible.
But they're just disasters. And the public service should not and is not capable of building or running properties. If you're watching this, I'm just sorry. Just look at the Eglinton LRT as an example of a project gone wrong. And I think you'll see the same thing with any attempts or reattempts to dip their toes back into becoming landlords. Definitely something that should be held for the private industry, and I think properly incentivized and deregulated in ways that both the Conservatives and Liberal are talking about, both parties. I think that is going to be the best path.
Yeah, totally agree. They're addressing the challenges, redesigning and doubling down the public land acquisition fund, publicly financing new construction, establishing a community housing bank to partner with nonprofit developers, co-ops, and Indigenous communities, speeding up approvals. We all know that has to happen. Like it just, no matter what party gets in, even if
Yes.
it's NDP, which won't happen, come on, let's freaking go already. Let's build,
go.
build. And then training skilled workers, training up to 100,000 more people, including newcomers and those displaced by trade wars in skilled trades to support housing construction, which I know is something that the Conservative Party's been talking about as well. So that's the only really information I could find on the NDP side. They've been a little bit more quiet for understandable reasons. And it looks like it's going to be a race between the Liberal government and the Conservative Party. A couple things I just wanted to touch on here for clarity purposes, and I needed this clarity as well. On this last slide here, I just wanted to make sure that we all understood what was happening with the capital gains tax and the position of all three parties on that. So for your principal residence, where you live, eat, breathe, sleep, there is no capital gains tax when you sell the property as of right now. Okay? Capital gains for your investor-owned homes. So if you're renting something out like a small condo or a cottage somewhere, and then you go to sell it, how much are you taxed? As of right now, the Conservative government is saying absolutely no change to that. And then I believe it was last June, if I'm not mistaken, the Liberal Party had proposed increasing the tax from 50% to 66.67% after it was briefly tabled. There was like hysteria over this. And it really rocked the market, but that actually never came to fruition. And we are still at the 50% level, and they are not expecting any changes to this as of yet. And then the NDP party, of course, wants to increase that from the current 50% to a potentially 75% or higher for capital gains on investor properties. Lastly, foreign buyers. Conservative Party maintain our current status, no foreign buyers. Same with the Liberal government. And then the NDP is saying that they will maintain that and or even strengthen it. So one thing I have seen a little bit of is possibly keeping this enacted, the foreign buyers ban, but for permitting investment of foreign entities into enterprise like purpose-built rental, for example, and inviting that type of foreign investment. I've seen that on the Conservative platform. I'm not really sure where the Liberal Party stands on that.
That's where I've actually seen it on the Liberal side.
Oh, okay. So they're both considering this as well. So I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on these two topics because I think there's a little bit of confusion because the ban was only supposed to be 2 years, but everyone is expecting the ban to continue. So that's where everybody sits on that.
Yep.
And then in terms of conclusion, this is sort of where I feel like all three parties' philosophies are. The Conservative Party is really about cutting bureaucracy, red tape, and regulation. The Liberal Party, in terms of housing, is about funding and incentives. And then the NDP is strongly focused on the public sector and affordability. And I think that's the path that they're taking in terms of their initiatives around housing.
Awesome. And there you have it.
Woo.
Completely 100% non-partisan objective, despite everything.
Well, I'm so glad that we did this. I actually found this to be exceptionally informative for us.
For sure.
And I think that we might want to visit a second part of this as we get closer to Election Day to see if there's any changes to the initiatives that we have discussed today, because I think these leaders are going to be rolling out more and more. I mean, we just saw the increase, for example, this morning to TSFAs under the Conservative platform. And I think it's been increased by $5,000 if I'm not mistaken. So I think there's going to be more and more that all three parties are going to be rolling out as we head towards April 28th. So perhaps we'll do another one similar to this. And of course, as I've mentioned throughout the podcast, if you have questions or comments or any clarity, or you have additional information that you think would be valuable to our viewers, please drop it in the comments section below. I would also like to add that every Thursday night at 6:00, we do go live on YouTube with the team, where we're giving a really boots on the ground perspective as to what's happening in Toronto real estate from our lens, which is more in real time versus just looking at data that comes out every month. We're talking about what we've seen on the street level, what's happening with our buyers, our sellers, our renters. What is our gut instinct telling us? Are we winning? Are we losing? Are we flat? What's going on? So please be sure to tune in every Thursday night at 6 o'clock, and you'll get to meet more team members who are just the best and so awesome and super smart. So I think you'll enjoy that too. Ralph, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, please be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. And if you have any comments, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Kori, on behalf of myself, I'd really like to thank you for doing this in-depth deep dive. It's just shocking that this information is so hard to find from all parties. And I think it says a lot about the current state of what's happening in terms of why we don't have a solution, because it really isn't front and center. And it should be. So hopefully we will see more coming out of the parties in terms of what they're going to do. And as we all know, when our economy is strong, our housing will become even stronger. And when our housing is strong, our economy will be stronger. So it's very cyclical. So keep your eye out for more updates from us. Kori, thank you so much once again for putting this information together. If you've made it to the end of this video and heard us droning on about policy, I promise you the next one will be more interesting. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to join us every Thursdays. We'd love to hear any comments down below. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.